Hi, my name is Sandoval-Hernández. I'm a reader in the Department of Education, and today I'm going to be talking to you about quantitative analysis, and in particular the use of international large-scale assessments.
So the contents of this presentation, we're going to talk briefly about what is quantitative research, what do we mean by international large-scale assessments, what are the main characteristics of these assessments, and how these assessments, international large-scale assessments, have been used in policy. So what is quantitative? Some of the main characteristics are related, for example, with the research questions. With quantitative research, we can answer questions like what, how much, or how many. Uh, what is the relationship between attitudes towards immigrants and citizenship participation? What is the relationship between living in an urban or a rural setting and the achievement scores of the people who live there, etc., etc. No? How many people agree or disagree to one policy or the other? These kind of questions. The, the characteristics of quantitative research also have to do with the findings. The kind of things that we are going to find when we do quantitative research is a measurement. We're going to measure things. Educational achievement. We are going to first define what do we mean by educational achievement, achievement in what, and then we are going to measure it. We're going to put a number to it. We're going to put it in a scale that we are going to be able to compare with something, with the objectives, with the curriculums, with the objectives set in the curriculum, with other schools, with other countries, comparison between boys and girls, etc. We also can find things that are related to causality. What is causing one thing or another? We go back to the example of educational research. We will see that some students, if we apply a test in mathematics, we will see that some students do better than others. What is the cause? Why this is happening? If we are testing training program for teachers, and it sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. We want to know why this is happening, and etc. No? So we can also do things that have to do with generalization. Let's say that in a qualitative study, we do a case study, and we realize that the boys do better in mathematics than girls because, and this is what we found in our case study, teachers have higher expectations for boys than for girls, and this is this is a finding. But the problem, or the problem is not really a problem, but the thing is that we did a study, qualitative study. We did observation, and we were observing uh, lessons for a year, and what we observed is that boys do better because teachers have higher expectations of boys than girls. So how do we know that this is the case everywhere else in the country? Or if we did the ethnography in one classroom, how do we know that this is the case in the whole school? How do we know this is the case in the whole district? Well, one way of doing it is through quantitative research. We collect a representative sample of schools. We do a test. We apply a test, or we can even do observation. It doesn't really matter. But the thing is that we have to count. Then we count, and then we can come up with an answer to whether this is generalizable everywhere in the country or just in some schools. Probably only the case in public schools, probably only in private schools, uh, so on and so forth. So, but these kind of things we can know with quantitative research. Has to do with data collection. That if we compare with qualitative research, it's going to be much more structured. The sample is going to be larger, and we are going to have well-defined measurements of what we are going to assess or evaluate. The approach, this approach is going to be hypothetic deductive in general, so which means that we're going to have we're going to have a hypothesis and we are going to try to test it. We're going to try to know whether this is true or not. So, for example, the hypothesis can be that boys do better in mathematics than girls, because we may have this hypothesis because this is what we have found in other cases or in other countries or previous research. So we want to know if this is the case in our school. So this is a hypothesis that we're going to have, and we are going to be able to test it. We are going to be able to know whether this is true or not. And this is very often what we do with quantitative research. Ontologically, the orientation is normally based on objectivism, which is oversimplifying philosophical system. Is a philosophical belief. The philosophical belief that certain things, especially moral truths or knowledge, exist, reality in general, exist independently of human knowledge or perception of them. So the ontological questions. Ontology refers to what is real. So from an objectivist perspective, we're going to say that things are real regardless of the perception that human beings have of them. So it doesn't matter if they are there or not. You may have heard this question. It was once posted in the Guardian, in the newspaper, and they were saying, if a tree falls in the middle of the forest and there's no one there to listen to it, does it still make noise or not? And this is a philosophical question at the end. Some people would say yes, because sound is defined as waves, and the waves exist independently of someone being there to listen to them. Some other people may say no, because sound is defined, or it exists in the moment that it's perceived by something or someone. So if there's nothing there to perceive the waves, then the waves don't exist. So this is the thing. With the quantitative research, we are gonna believe that things exist, reality exists, regardless of human beings. And when regarding the epistemological orientation, this is the positivist orientation that in general terms is gonna epistemological orientation is gonna tell us how do we know what knowledge is valid. And in this case, positivism is a philosophical theory or approach that states that certain knowledge is based on natural phenomena and their properties and relations. So the information derived from sensory experience, interpreted through reason or logic. In other words, the valid knowledge is going to be only the knowledge that we can perceive with our senses. Or if we put it more in terms of quantitative research, it's a very strong assumption. And again, oversimplifying it, it could be translated into something like, if we can measure it, it exists. If we cannot measure it, it doesn't exist. So this is a very strong assumption, but it's really what happened when you collect information through a survey, through a questionnaire, and then you run some statistical models. So you assume that whatever variables you put in the models are the things that exist. And whatever we cannot put in our model, we assume that it doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist because we cannot measure it, so we cannot consider it. Again, it's a very strong assumption, but well, and of course I'm making things black and white, which is not like that. In reality, there are many shades of gray in between. But well, this is just to give you a taste of what are the philosophical underpinnings of quantitative research. And of course, it's not only objectivism, positivism, but it's also a critical realist perspective that can be used, and in recent times have been used a lot for quantitative methods, because it addresses most of the criticisms that we find or we can have for objectivism and positivisms in their purest forms. So the key terms of quantitative research. There are three, well, there are more things, but these three things are very important to have very clear in our minds when we talk about quantitative research. And the first one is the independent variable. What is an independent variable? What is an explanatory variable? What is a dependent variable or outcome? What is a control variable? This might seem to be very easy, very even silly, but it is really not, because it's not always as clear as we would think. But we have to have a very clear, when we do quantitative research or when we read quantitative research, what is the outcome? What is what we want to measure? In general, if we talk about education, again, we're going to talk about educational achievement. So what variable measures educational achievement in my research, in the paper that I'm reading? So it could be mathematics achievement, and it could be score from 0 to 1000 that measures how all the mathematics that a child should know when they finish 4th grade. So this is our outcome variable, and we have to keep that clear always, because it's very easy to get diverted or distracted. Then we're going to have a number of variables that are going to explain the differences in the outcome variable. So if we apply a mathematics test, we expect, and what is going to happen is that different children are going to have different scores. So how can we explain these different scores? Well, someone would say, why different children have different scores? Because they are different, but different in what? Those are the explanatory variables. They are different in which some of them are boys, some of them are girls, some of them come from socially advantaged families, some of them come from socially disadvantaged contexts, some of them study harder than others, some of them do more homework than others, some of them have more support from their parents than others, some of them have a better teacher than others, and all these are explanatory variables that so they are the differences in the subjects that are going to explain the differences in their achievement, in their performance in the test, the differences in the outcome variable. So we explain difference in one thing with differences in other thing. So those are the explanatory variables. And among those explanatory variables, we might have special interest in one variable or in a smaller set of variables, which could be, we are doing a study about educational achievement, but we are focusing on motivation. So this is our main explanatory variable. And the rest of the variables, the rest of the explanatory variables, they become control variables, which is all the other things that we're going to keep constant in order to see whether or not motivation in this case has an effect or can explain the differences in the outcome variable. So there are different approaches to quantitative research. One thing that we can do is, one approach that we can have is a descriptive approach, which is to understand the scale of significance of a particular phenomenon. So, for example, are there gender gaps in mathematics, or normally boys do better in mathematics, girls do better in reading? Do we have these gaps in this country? What is the size of the gap? So that would be something descriptive. We could also uncover certain specific patterns in a generalizable way. For example, economically unequal countries tend to be unequal in educational terms too. That could be the case, but we need a description of the data in order to know if this is true. We can plot it, we can have it in a graph, and we can see that countries that are more unequal based on the Gini index are also more unequal in terms of their educational achievement, for example. We could also have an approach that is more explanatory in nature. And what we do in this case is to propose mechanisms that might explain a particular phenomenon. For example, we know probably that there is an association, there is a positive association between technology and achievement. It might be the case, or there might be evidence in the literature or from our own research that the children who use more technology also tend to achieve better, to perform better in school. But why could this, the question would be, is that always the case? Is that easy? We just get children to use more technology and they're going to do better in school? And probably the answer is going to be no. Never things are so easy, so straightforward. And so probably we have to add an explanation to this relationship. And in this case, there are some papers. One of my PhD students, for example, she's working on the concept of technological capital, which is nothing else but the resources that people have to maximize the benefits of technology, which in the case of children, it could be parents who know how to use technology, probably friends or other relative or family members who can help them to make the most out of a tablet. It's not the same using a tablet a lot to play Fortnite that using a tablet a lot to do exercises, mathematics exercises, or for reading ebooks. And if there's someone, an adult in the house, controlling how this technology is being used and making sure that the benefits of technology are maximized, of course, this could be an explanation for the positive relationship between the use of technology and achievement. And we can test, or many quantitative research are based on this idea, on these kind of things. Some of the more common designs are, one of them is quasi-experiments. And this is basically the idea that you are going to have you want to test a treatment. You want to test whether an intervention is positive or not. So one thing that you can do, let's say that we're talking about an app for learning English, and we want to know, someone developed an app, and we want to know if the app is effective or not, if it is helping or not. So what we are going to do in most cases is to have two groups, a treatment group and a non-treatment group, or a control group. So what we're going to do is to do a pre-test. In this case, we would do a test of English of the two groups. We would check that on average, they perform the same. And then we're going to have one school year or 1 month or one period during which the students of the treatment group, only one group, use the app. And then after that, we are going to have another test. And if the idea is that if the app is effective, if it is a positive intervention, the children who use the app are going to have a better achievement, better score than the ones who didn't use the app. If there is no difference, that means that the app is neither good or bad. But it could also be that there's a negative difference, that the ones who didn't use the app did better than the ones who used the app. So in that case, it would be a negative effect. So in other words, what we are doing is to estimate the effect of the treatment. And this is a very common design for quantitative research. And we call it quasi-experiment because it's not really an experiment, because during the treatment, before and after, there are going to be many other things that are going to affect the result of the test. We are going to try to control and to keep things as constant as possible, but it's never the case. That's why we say it's a quasi-experiment. Experiment we can do if we are doing research on physics or, I don't know, chemical reactions, because then we can isolate the phenomenon that we want to study. But because we are dealing with human beings, we cannot really do that. So another design can be a survey. I think most of you have heard about a survey. Then this is about gathering information from a sample of people, traditionally with the intention of generalizing the results to a larger population. And it's normally the information is collected through a questionnaire. And basically on your right-hand side, you will have the main steps of developing a survey. But basically it's define a research question, specify a population, identify a sampling frame, choose the data collection that you're going to use, online surveys, face-to-face surveys, telephone surveys, etc. Select a sample, a representative sample, an aleatory sample, There are different ways of doing that as well. If our population are all the students in the University of Bath, random sample we could select by putting the names of all the students in a hat, shaking the hat, and taking pieces of paper with the names of the students who are going to be part of the study. But of course, there are many other ways. No? We can have a systematic random sample design in which we have all the students again of the sampling framework, but in a list. And then at random, we are going to have a random interval to select the cases that are going to participate in the survey, or there are many other ways. Then we will need to collect this information, put it in a data set, come up with a hypothesis or research question, with, which we already had a research question, but we can formalize it in a hypothesis to test it with a statistical test. We analyze the data and we interpret the results. And of course, these results are meant to fit into the research question again. Some of the main strengths of quantitative research, they allow us for a clear snapshot of something across space and time. So we can take a picture, a big picture of what's going on about the issue that we're interested in. It also allows us to collect and analyze information that is representative of a large number of individuals. We can have a sample. For example, just to give you an example, when we talk about the PISA data from the OECD, they collect information of 150 schools and one classroom within this, one classroom or 30 children within the schools, that 150 schools that were selected. And with that information, they can generalize for the whole country. In a country like the US, or in a country like Mexico that has 130 million people, if we have a good sample, a rigorous sample, 150 schools are going to be enough for us to get information that is representative, that is generalizable for the whole population of the country. So this is an advantage, of course. It also provides a sense of objectivity that can, of course, is very valued when we have to design or develop policies and practices. And also, well, what I was saying, it provides information that you can generalize across a country, across people. No? If you have different time points, you can generalize across time as well. No? Now let's move to the ILSAS, or International Large-Scale Assessments. So what are international large-scale assessments for? They can be for three main things: diagnosis, analysis, and when we say diagnosis, it's this idea of having a map. You have a map of the country and you want to know where are the red lights, how the things are behaving. So, for example, we can have a diagnosis against objectives. We may know that there is a gender gap in mathematics, and that boys are doing better than girls, and we know that this is not desirable, that we wouldn't like to have a gap. So if we know that there is a gap, and we run the test again and again and again, let's say every 3 years or every 4 years, we can set objectives and say we're going to decrease this gap in 5 points every 5 years. And I say this is like a map, because then we can actually have a map and see that we are reaching the objectives in some places but not in others, or that we are reaching the objectives in mathematics in general, but if we disaggregate by geometry and arithmetics and different sub areas, probably we are doing it well in some and not so well in some others. So this is the idea of the diagnosis. And this is another example. In this case, there are the average of scales. The first one is gender equality, attitudes towards gender equality, attitudes towards equality for immigrants, and attitudes towards equality for different ethnic groups. And we have different countries, and then we have this diagnosis. We can have a diagnosis. Where are we doing better than in other countries? Benchmarking function. This is the idea of the jumping bar. If I train on my own to jump, I want to jump higher and higher and higher, I might be able to do it. And after training every day for a year, I might be able to record that I now can jump higher than before. But how much is much? How do I know if I am a good jumper? And the only way to know probably is to compare myself with other people who is also jumping. And well, this is the idea of the benchmarking function. We are going to see some other examples. This is a very interesting website, a very interesting institution. Is the Center on International Education Benchmarking. And what they do is to see what countries do well in these international tests. But not only that, it's not only the benchmarking, but what they do is to go and see why they are doing better. So they start with a quantitative data, and then they go into a qualitative analysis of to discover the reasons why. And just to give you one example from here, the case of Japan, everybody knows, or it's kind of common knowledge that Japanese children do very well in mathematics. They're very good for mathematics. But we also know that they are some of the most stressed students in the world. We have these stories about Japanese students committing suicide and this kind of thing. So how do they know that they are good in mathematics? Because they compare themselves with other countries, and they see that among all countries, Japanese children do very well. How do they know that their students are very stressed? Well, there are different ways of knowing, but at least one of them is by comparing the level of stress of Japanese students with the level of stress of students in Canada or the US or Nigeria or Guatemala or whatever. So if they see that they saw at some point that they were very good in mathematics, but they also had very high levels of stress. So in this center, what they do is to monitor these things. So they realize that, but they also realize that at some point Japan managed to maintain their high levels of mathematics performance, but at the same time to decrease the levels of stress. So here, if you click in the Japanese case, you will see an analysis of what did they do to keep high levels of performance and lower the levels of stress in their students. And what you're going to see there is how did they benchmark that, and how did they, what kind of policies they implemented, how did they design the policies, how did they implement the policies, how did they evaluate the policies, and ended up with these results. And of course, this is important and interesting because not only the Japanese children are the ones who are stressed. I mean, they are stressed in other countries, in most of the Asian countries in general, no, as compared with children in other countries. But this is just one example. There are many other examples about different things in different countries, and this is an interesting website. If you click on it, on this slide, it will take you to the. Another thing that we can do is this analytic function. The analytic function is we can use it to suggest hypotheses about things. In this scheme, in this figure, we have an ethnic minority with an arrow pointing to mathematics scores. What we're saying here is we have a variable that tells us whether a child belongs or not to an ethnic minority. So when it belongs to an ethnic minority, if it doesn't belong, it's 0. If it belongs, it's 1. So if it belongs to an ethnic minority, his or her mathematics scores on average is 25 points lower than if it doesn't belong to an ethnic minority. So this is in country A. So we may think, so what can we do about it? I mean, this is not something desirable. What can we do about it? And someone may say, well, we're gonna give teachers professional development so they can learn some strategies to help children from ethnic minorities. So they do it. So we have this variable, whether they take teaching the training or not. and we see that the effect is very, very small. It doesn't have an asterisk, which means it's not statistically significant, and the effect in any case is only 0.07, so not even 10% of a score point, so it's negligible. So we may conclude that then teacher professional development is not a good intervention, it's not a good idea, and start looking somewhere else. However, if we do the same analysis, because we have comparative information from another country, for country B, we do the same variables, whether it belongs to an ethnic minority or no, the children, and the difference in this case in country B was 24 points. And the same question here, whether the teacher took professional development focused on ethnic minorities. And in this case, in this country B, we see that the effect is 12 points and is statistically significant. So it decreases the differences in half by taking the training. So this is important because if we compare across the two countries, we may know that teacher professional development can be a good intervention. And in that case, we could do something similar to what we were discussing before in this Center for International Benchmarking, and see what are the details. So what kind of training was it, how many hours, who delivered it, what was the curriculum, etc., etc. But then in this way, one country can learn from another. There are other examples, like in this case, this is from a study that we did with civic and citizenship data from civics and citizenship education study. And we took a theoretical model that is called informed social engagement model, that is a theory. It tells us social engagement is composed by electoral participation and illegal protest and legal protests. And these three things compose social engagement. And these things are explained, differences in these things are explained by differences in the sense of agency, in the capacity for empathy, in the ability to analyze evidence, and there are some control variables. And in turn, we could say that sense of agency can be defined as informal participation, participation in school, political efficacy, and citizenship efficacy. All these things we are taking from a theory, but because we have data, we can operationalize it, and we can measure an empirical model based on a theoretical model, and we can see whether this model fits reality, empirical data, or not, or whether it does in some countries and not in some others. This is also a way to evaluate different theories, because you can operationalize different theories and see what model fits better the data. And this is another thing that you information. Now, there are many different kinds of, many different international large-scale assessments. The pioneers were the International Association for Evaluation of Educational Achievement, the IEA. They are based in Germany, and they have these studies that you may have heard of: TEAMS, PEARLS, ICCS. So they have one study for mathematics, another for reading, another for civic education. They are the pioneers, but probably the most popular ones is the PISA OECD. And PISA, the OECD also has a PIAC, which is the adult version of PISA for adults. They have another study on teachers. And well, these are like the main players, the big players. More recently, there's a trend for regional studies, in which other organizations have been sponsoring other studies. And the thing is that when the IEA started within ILSAS in the 1950s, there were 11 countries, if I remember well, in the first study. And in the last cycle of PISA, we had more than 100 countries. So some people have started to question whether having countries that are very, very different makes any sense. I mean, these studies are about comparing, but can we really compare the policies? Can we learn from the policies of Sweden? Can Ethiopia learn from the policies that are developed in Sweden, being the context so different, the level of development, the training of the teachers, even the cultural context, or even the climate, they're so different that many people think that it doesn't make any sense to compare countries that are so different. So for this reason, organizations like UNESCO organize the Regional Comparative and Explanatory Study. This is they are now working on the fourth cycle, and this is a study only for Latin American countries. So the point here, the idea is that it makes more sense, that it's more useful to do this kind of international but regional studies than having the global ones. Why? Because countries in Latin America, to begin with, they speak the same language, they have similar culture, they have a similar history, similar states of development in terms of democracy and economic development. So they are more alike, so they can learn easier from each other. UNESCO also has this the SACMEC study for the Southern and Eastern Africa. The World Bank is sponsoring PASEC, which is a study for French-speaking countries, and also PRIDI, which is a country on child development indicators, only for Central American countries. And the idea is that it makes more sense. If you want to have a good overview on all the different international large-scale assessments, again, you can click on this picture in the presentation, and it will take you to the ILSA gateway, where it's a single point in which is concentrated information about all these assessments. Some fact sheets with basic information on the assessment, but also the theoretical frameworks of each assessment, the technical manual, the data, the international reports, the results that they obtain, etc., etc. Now, when we talk about assessments and we have, these are just some examples from the Handbook of International Large-Scale Assessments. Is one of the readings that I'm suggesting for this part of the unit. And you're going to have the details in the reading, but just to give you some examples, things that have happened because of assessments, or how these assessments have been used for policy. In Kenya, for example, they have been used to monitor the impact of free universal primary education on quality of education. So we know that in countries where it is not free and is not universal primary education, when they make it universal, you have a large number of people coming into the education system. And this is the people who was normally not included, and this is normally the people who are more disadvantaged, and normally the people who perform they don't perform so good in the education system. So when you have a big proportion of these people coming to the education system, the quality of the performance on average of the country tends to decrease. So these studies have been used in Kenya to monitor this situation and to make sure that this is not the case, to have a design preventive policies, but also policies to fix the situation once this is happening. In Australia, for example, they were used to first to identify significant gender and socioeconomic gaps, and then to design compensatory programs and to monitor the effectiveness of these programs in the country. And well, these are just examples. Some criticism, not comprehensive, of course, but probably the most famous one is the objection to league tables and the perverse results of having these league tables. The problem with the league tables that they do not consider the context. They don't take the context into account. So there are some children, for the people who are teachers, they may say there are some teachers among you, this group, you will say, or you will know that there are some students are easier, between quotation marks, easier to teach than others. And the point here would be to what extent these league tables take that into consideration. Probably it's not that the school is better because the students perform better. Probably this is they have students who are easier to teach. No? So it's not the same to teach students in a developed country in an urban context than if you go to Central America, for example, where there are some children who have to walk 3 hours every morning to get to school. Not and probably not even every morning, but every afternoon. So probably they're working in the fields in the morning, and then after a day of work, they have to walk 3 hours without having had lunch to go to school, and then walk back 3 hours to go home, go to bed, and go to work next day in the morning. So these children are not going to be it's not going to be so easy to teach them and to reach the objectives that you have because the conditions are very different. To what extent these league tables take those things into consideration? This is the question and one of the criticisms. Other things are like, particularly with PISA, that they promote a free market agenda in education, which is true, but to be fair, they are very open about it. No? But if you follow the documents or you do a little bit of policy analysis, you will see that these countries, these organizations like PISA, for example, they promote uh, autonomy. One thing is school autonomy and decentralization. So they use their data, they use the reports, their policy briefs, the interpretation of their studies to promote this agenda because of, well, to be fair, because they think this is the best thing we can do in order to improve the quality of education across the world. No? But at the same time, and it's related with the next point, which is this in many cases that represents a very narrow or limited view of the education systems and in general of the context of the different worlds. Autonomy might be a good idea in some countries and might be a very bad idea in some other countries. And that depends on the context again. No? In some countries, most of the teachers have a master's degree. Most of the teachers and head teachers have a continuous professional training, professional development. So probably those teachers who are prepared to be autonomous and to take their own decisions about how to teach and how to manage the school, they make the most out of it. But in some other countries, you have teachers who are not teachers, who were not trained to be teachers. In some countries, you have people who finished lower secondary education and they are the ones who are teaching primary education. So they don't have any pedagogic skills or training, but still they are teaching. In some countries, you have Mexico, for example, you have these telesecundarias, which is in these remote areas where no teacher wants to go and teach there, or there are very few children, 2 or 3 children is not worth to build a school. So they have a TV, and the children take the lessons from a TV. And there's someone coordinating the telesecundaria who makes sure that there are, I don't know, that the TVs are turned on at the right time, etc., etc. So again, can this person make decisions about the pedagogical approach of the telesecundaria or not? Is that a good idea or not? And these policies or these agendas that are the OECD in particular in this case push, they are, again, sometimes the criticism is that they are out of context. There are some other things that are more technical. For example, the sampling. There was in 2012, I think, Shanghai for the first time participated in PISA and they were at the top of the ranking. And after many people praising Shanghai and saying that well, actually, the news in the newspapers was China is the best country in the world in PISA. And then the thing was that it was actually not China, the whole China, but Shanghai, the ones who had participated. And then further, they said that the sampling framework, the people who were considered for the study, was not all the 15 years old in Shanghai, but only 79% of them, because Shanghai decided to consider only the students who have been born in Shanghai, because those are the ones who are allowed to go to the public schools in Shanghai. And the others who were not born there but lived there and study there, they were not considering the study because they attend private, low quality, normally low quality schools. So the point here is that if all the children, all the 15 years old in Shanghai had been participated in the study, Shanghai wouldn't have done as good as they did. So this is again a criticism on how do you choose the sampling framework? Is it, and that changes, you will see, if you go and look in detail, you will see that in some countries they take only public schools, some countries they take private and public schools, in some countries they exclude international schools, in some countries they exclude schools for children with this, for disabled children, and some schools they don't. I mean, there are some issues that have to do with the sampling. We already said that about the achievement model that assumes homogeneous population. So we are assuming that children behave the same in Peru, Italy, Singapore, Nigeria, and Sweden. No, and that is probably more delicate when we talk about the is because it's not only a mathematics test, they also ask children about their motivation to study, about their self-efficacy. And this issue of social desirability, what is perceived as correct to answer, also varies from country to country. So there is a cultural invariance in there. And then finally, we have also the thing with do we have evidence-based policy or policy-based evidence? Do we design policies based on evidence or produce evidence to justify policies? This is something that I wrote about last year on a blog that is called International Education. And the blog entry that I wrote is called Everything Works Somewhere and Nothing Works Everywhere. This is the link. You can click on this picture and it will take you to the link. But basically what I do there is take the results from PISA 2015 and come up with some policy questions or policy initiatives. For example, I said, if someone decides that they want to have a policy to decrease the classroom size, to have less students in the classroom. So let's say that the average in the country is 30, and someone said, no, it's a good idea to decrease it to 20. Well, if we look for evidence in PISA, we'll find it to justify this policy. But at the same time, if someone says, you know what, we have to have larger classrooms, we have to have more students in the classroom on average, you will have evidence in PISA to justify such a policy. And I have 3 or 4 policies like that, and you have evidence for both, for contradictory things. Depends how you treat the data, no? So someone also says, if you torture your data enough, it will tell you what you want to hear. And this is what we should avoid and we should be critical of. Interpretation issues. Well, this is just, that has to do with the context again, no? These are things that the director of PISA has said before. PISA shows what is possible in education and takes away excuses from those who are complacent, or success will go to the individuals, institutions, and countries which are swift to adapt, slow to complain, and open to change. And again, complete ignorance of the context. Without taking into consideration the context, these things are said, and well, of course, it will have consequences for unintended, undesirable consequences in many cases. So finally, to keep in mind, this data is underutilized. There's lots of efforts, lots of money that is invested into producing this data, and then not many people uses it. And I want to invite you, persuade you probably to use it. It's not so difficult. There are many tools that are developed. If you go to this ILSA gateway or go to the website of the different studies, you will see that there are tools, many times online tools that you don't even need to download anything into your computer. You can run some analysis and you can always use this information to contextualize almost any topic that you are interested in, if you are interested in, of course, in educational issues. No? For example, if you want to talk about gender gaps or gender differences in schools, you can start by setting the scene in the country, in the world, to what extent this is an issue, to what extent this is happening, what are the size of the gaps, in what subjects is worse than in others, and then you can probably do a case study, qualitative case study. You can do some interviews, but you can set the scene. You can give some context using this information, and this is well, it's quick. It wouldn't take you too long, and it's free. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And please do feel free to contact me if you have further questions or would like to discuss any other point. Thank you.